Sweet Taste of Cake by The Descendant. Chapter 14. The New Girl. Cupcake had lost track of the number of times that they had worked together to make a gingerbread house. Basic math would say they had been married for more than 10 years. That should just be about the same number of houses that they had made. But if truth were known, there had been more than that. Sometimes they had made several in a year. Some years they had worked late into the night and early into the next morning in their efforts to meet deadlines. Sometimes they had finished their work and collapsed right there in the morning sunlight that came in through the big picture window. They had let it wash over them as they slumbered together in its warmth. A smile lifted from her as she thought of all their little tricks, all of the practiced little motions that they had learned to employ when working together. They had become more than just little habits. They had expanded and become more like traditions. All of those years had sped by. They had remained there, ready for one another at all times, always able to feel the needs, fears, and wants of the other. It was as though they just seemed to know what the other was thinking and feeling. It was the little things that mattered. Those signaled the way their lives had melded so completely. The traditions that they employed as they made those gingerbread houses proved it. That was the reason why the dollop of frosting was sitting inside her mind, the way it still sat upon his nose as they worked, calling to her. It was because it was new, something unexpected that suddenly was taking on a new meaning. She knew it was remarkably silly to feel this way, but as the morning began to fade and the gingerbread house neared completion, she felt herself contemplating it more, wondering what it had truly meant had he not removed it. She smiled a little smile and went back to finishing up the gingerbread house. The stage directions would once again read that time had moved forward, but the scene had not changed. Time had settled around the ponies that played in both rounds of the game of this, and soon almost a decade had flown by. For some players, the change had been obvious. Almost a decade had turned the nephew and nieces of Carrot and Cupcake, Ruby's children, into teenagers. They had perhaps stopped being so cute, but they had grown up strong and smart. The oldest mare was studious and intellectual. The colt, perhaps a touch rowdy. The youngest mare, a lover of art and music. For each had come a mark, the magic of the land displaying itself upon them, the seal of the sovereign. For Ivory Script, careful planning and hard work had paid off. Amid a wild celebration, she had won her first term as mayor, perhaps the youngest in the history of Ponyville. For the senior players, time had moved as expected, and Ledger and his wife found themselves perhaps not so sprightly, perhaps more willing to let Trammell run things at the mill on certain days of the week. Cheesecake and Wishing Well seemed to be defying time itself, as the two mares rebuilt their old friendship. It seemed as though it was feeling both of them. For Quarry came new aches and pains. The old stallion saw more gray than black in his mane each time he looked in a mirror. But one of our principal actors, the two who had sat upon that bed nearly a decade earlier and had promised to go on the journey together. For Carrot, life looked much different as he sat upon the precipice of his early 30s. He had struggled to make his bakery grow. Yet, it seemed that true prosperity had remained just out of his reach. He could not complain. He was providing for them. Or more accurately, he was doing his part towards their plans and hopes. For Cupcake, life had not been as sad as she feared it would be when she was sitting upon the examination table, using tissue after tissue. They were living for each other, each of their axes supporting the other. While they were hardly wealthy, she was happy, and the journey had taken them to amazing new places. They had traveled, seen faraway cities and even distant lands. They still received New Year's greetings from a delightful Patreon couple who had taken them on a month-long trip through Severia. They had returned to that small village in the swamp many times. They had kept the good friends there who sent away gifts. Crates of oranges and citrus had arrived as each winter set in, and the fruits a welcome addition to their goods to be sold in the bakery. But the greatest joy for her, and for Carrot, had been watching their nieces and nephew grow. Now they were adolescents, and their trips to Sugar Corner were growing less frequent. The icebox store was starting to look bare without the gifts that had once been presented by the smiling families to a beaming uncle and delighted aunt. Together they had been many places and seen many things. Through their struggles, they never stopped trying to be there for one another. Never stopped finding excuses to press their hooves together and draw a heart around the symbol they had created. Yet, as their world had drawn into their second decade together, they could not help but wonder if there was some place they were supposed to be going on this journey. What was their expedition going to discover? There was no way for them to know that they were the destination, that they were the point to which strings of causality were being drawn. "Later, Grandpa!" called the colt, Quarry barely even seeing his grandson flash out the door. The stallion turned to reply, but the door had already slammed shut, leaving him once more alone in the kitchen. "Later," he said to the empty room. He woke wishing well, and to his immense relief, she seemed to wish to walk today, her condition seeming to be at an ebb. It came and went. The battle between the magics deep within her, and as truces seemed to be called, he happily watched her regain some of her strength. The magic of friendship can be awesome sometimes. Corey wished her a good day and gave her a kiss. With that, he was out the door and up to his office. The warm summer sun fell over the stallion as he walked along. He sneered, but it set upon his face as he made his way up the cobblestone streets. The expression was enough to send certain ponies who remembered the old quarry walking to the other side. The expression was not meant to scare any pony. Instead, it was directed within. Quarry was sneering at himself, cursing his old joints that did not want to move as directed, welcoming the warmth of his sovereign sun to sit upon his bones. He looked older than he was. Felt every bit older, too. His massive frame was still imposing, the dart of his eyes still enough to raise alarm at those caught in them. But he was older. To Quarry, he felt like an old ship whose timbers were growing. A ship that had begun to leak in places deep and not easily fixed, perhaps fatally so. Paperclip greeted him as he entered the hospitable Loan and Trust, his flagship business, and the one he had always tended personally. His oldest colt, the one living with his own growing family in Manhattan, had taken over almost all the others. Only this one and his cooperative with the rock farmers were still truly his own to guide. Corey took the mail from her, and as they went over the schedule for today, it chatted about any number of things. As they did, he watched the new goldfish circle the bowl. He tried to remember which incarnation of Bubbles this was, each succeeding inheritor of the bowl keeping the traditional name. With that, he took his coffee into the small, unadorned office and gave a deep sigh. As he did, he wondered if there was any pony out there who was aging as poorly as he was. Inside an instant, he got his answer. The bell above the door rang out, the familiar sound causing him to lift his eyes over the schedule. There was not supposed to be anyone in for over an hour. The schedule was mostly bare that day. He ran his hoof through his graying mane and listened for the tone that Paperclip would take as she met whoever just arrived. To his surprise, it was a happy one. As soon as her muffled voice had sung out, he recognized the owner of the other voice as well. With a grunt, he lifted himself from the chair and walked back to the door. As he opened it, he discovered the face of an old friend. A face that was set with deep concern. eyes that age alone had not sunken in, except beneath a faded hat. Corey could see something painful there, something that seemed to be eating away at this Earth pony, one of his few close friends.
"Clyde?"
asked Corey.
"What can we do for you, my friend?"
The figure of Clyde turned from Paperclip and set Corey with a distant stare, one that actually made the stallion glance.
"Oh, Corey, my bucko,"
said Clyde as he held his hat against his chest and wavered his hooves.
"I'm sorry, my old friend. But I've got to ask you a favor. In Celestia's name, my old mate, I hate to do it, but I have no pony who else I could turn."
Corey nodded. With a grunt, he motioned to Clyde with his hoof.
"Ain't no shame in asking for help,"
he said while gesturing over his shoulder.
"That's why we have friends. Come in my office, Clyde. Let's get a fix of what's troubling you."
The two stallions entered Corey's austere office, the larger of the two sliding once more into his hard wooden chair with a distinct sound of effort. He began to wish that he had switched to soft pillows a long time ago. Thought to himself that any advantage it gave to him, his applicants sitting awkwardly upon the seats, was no longer worth being so uncomfortable. As Corey settled in, he looked Clyde over. In the glaring lights of his office, the features of the other Earth pony came into stark relief. Corey flinched a bit to see how shrunken he had appeared, how his mane appeared to be falling out, and how ballooned his stomach had become. He noticed these things, of course, over the last few years. He hadn't mentioned them out of politeness, and in the hope that not mentioning them would somehow spare him from having to recognize his own growing age. As Corey's eyes met Clyde, an awareness fell through him. It wasn't just age that was doing this to Clyde. There was something more.
"My pinky,"
spoke Clyde as he gave a single tremble.
"Corey, she's dying. I'm killing her, Corey."
Corey glanced again and shook his head.
"Clyde,"
he spoke while the trademark rumble came out of his voice.
"What? Damn, what do you mean?"
Clyde seemed to collapse within himself. His eyes seemed to fall away and stare off toward a horizon that the blank walls of Corey's office hid from all but his perception.
"My pinkie pie.
The one with the balloons as their mark," he began as Corey pictured the bouncy pink pony in his head.
"Can't do anything else for her, Corey, my bucko. She used me up."
For the next few minutes, Corey listened as one of his oldest friends told him a story, one that revealed a sad truth. Pinkie Pie had remained herself, yet had become more so. Clyde spoke of how the farm could no longer contain her powerful abilities, how her laughter had first seemed to fill them, but now it had overwhelmed them. Clyde spoke of her somehow sensing things, a set of senses that seemed to supersede even her mark, how it at first fascinated them, but now seemed poised to overcome them. As Corey listened, his jaw shifted back and forth. Clyde told him that the other girls, Inky, Blinky, and Maud, who had once reveled in Pinkie's abilities as fillies, tired of the young mares, with the exception of Maud, who loved every minute of it. Strife had entered the little white farmhouse, robbing it of the joy it had once echoed through it.
"She come buzzing into the house one day with an advert looking for kumquat farmers down in the Southlands,"
Clyde said as he wiped his hoof across the forehead, rubbing it raw and red.
"She said that it sounds like fun to say kumquat, so that it must be fun to farm the fruits. Oh, my Celestia, Corey, they sent her back to us. They couldn't deal with us.
Our poor Pinkie Pie coming off the train a sobbing mess." Corey's jaw shifted back and forth.
"He who makes Pinkie cry must die."
Clyde spoke of 10 years' worth of trying, doing everything they could to help their Pinkamena. the way they had struggled to find some pony who could help her explore her mark. Yet how those ponies had gone pelting off, smeared with frosting. Clyde spoke of the special summer camp for those trying to understand their mark. The way he'd gone pick her up only to find buildings lit aflame and filled with popcorn. "I can't help her anymore, Quarry," said Clyde as he lifted his face to his friend. "Roxy, poor suffering wife, seeing I can't keep up with her. None of us are so young anymore. She's only getting stronger, seemingly without constraint. Needs somebody to lead her into her mark." Clyde gave another shudder, closed his eyes, and looked at Quarry with some small horror hidden behind his eyes. "There's not been a chicken hatched at a farm within 12 miles of ours that ain't had a birthday party for 3 years. 2 days ago, I came home to see her throwing a party for some rocks and a flag of flour, Quarry. A bucket flag of flour!" wailed Clyde, his curse being the first Quarry had heard from him in their long friendship. "Quarry, please, I need your help." Clyde spoke again, fixing his sunken eyes upon Quarry once more. "She's dying out there on my farm. There's naught I could do for her, and she's suffering for it. I don't know what to do for her." Quarry looked at Clyde, saw the very real worry that had rested there. The worry of a father for his family. He was more than familiar with it. As Clyde continued to tremble and shake, Quarry leaned back and let out a slow sigh. Of course he would help, but how? The pink filly's mark was one of exuberance, joy, partying. That was something he himself wasn't much good at, and he doubted Paperclip was interested in breaking in a new girl here at his office. His mind wandered, thought of what parties involved. Balloons, streamers, punch, cakes.
"I think I might have something for her,"
Quarry spoke as he nodded to Clyde.
"But I gotta run it by my son-in-law."
As he watched, something seemed to settle within Clyde, as though life were returning to him, the possibility itself lifting his broken spirit. A short while later, Quarry was trotting through the street once more, this time making for Sugar Cube Corner. He had admitted to Carrot long ago that he preferred the new name, but when he asked what inspired it all he got was a few giggles and a blush. He let the matter drop as a knowing look had passed between his daughter and the stallion that he had begun taking to calling son. He reached the store, skidding to a stop across the cobblestones. Quarry sighed, knew that he was about to break one of his old rules. Favors. He hated asking for favors. Hated being asked for them even more. Friends mattered, though, and so many of the old rules were already dead to him. With that, Quarry entered Sugar Cube Corner. There were already a few customers within. As he waited for them to clear, he looked deep within a glass bell jar and studied the eclairs within. He pondered the face of an old, grade-made stallion that stared back at him even more. This Quarry was a vastly different stallion than Mean Quarry in many ways. Though the massive frame still stood around him, he knew that much of the power had come out of it, and much of his rage with it. He knew that it had been replaced with something else, something far more valuable. He saw his own mark, the latter coming out of a pit of rock, reflected in a distant showcase. He thought about how like his own mark he was. He was hard, but he had been pulled up by something. Something that the amber-colored stallion that now called to him helped reveal. "Quarry! Good to see you. Can I get you something? Let me grab Cupcake and tell her that you're here."
"Hold on there for a second, son. I need to talk to you a bit. Oh, and you can wrap me up in a clear, too."
he said, placing emphasis on the first letter of the treat. He rolled the E in a long tone as he lifted his hoof to Carrot, calling him closer. As Carrot read the eclair, he alternated between preparing it and listening to his father-in-law, letting the entirety of what the stallion was asking him grow upon him.
I have a good friend, one who's got troubles,
said Corey with his low, rumbling tone evident.
One of his foals has grown up strong at their mark, and he's got no clue what to do. Since the kid's mark is for partying and the like, if that more often than not leads to eating and such, I thought of you.
Corey stopped, shifted his jaw back and forth, let the uncomfortable word prepare itself before dropping out over the room.
I'm wondering if you do me a favor. Do you need an apprentice?
He said with an uncharacteristic stutter. Carrot nodded back to Corey. Well, he said, I've always wondered what it would be like to have one. I'm certainly not opposed. A friend of yours is a friend of mine, of course. I'll have to ask Cupcake first, but I'm more than happy to help. I won't say no to a little help around here. Let him send the cold around and we'll...
Billy, more of a young mare point of fact,
interrupted Corey, looking down at Carrot as the stallion handed him his eclair. An expression wavered across Carrot's face, one that Corey reflected upon as he awaited the reply of the stallion he had taken as family. Well, I'm not opposed, but I can't bring any pony into this house without Cupcake's opinion. I especially won't bring a young mare into our home without her saying it's okay. I hope you understand, said Carrot as he looked to his father-in-law. Carrot felt Corey pat him on the shoulder.
You got a way of knowing the right thing to say at the right time. You know that, son?
Said Corey with a chuckle.
Don't worry about it too much. If some pony you see knows. If there's anything I could do for you, don't be afraid so to say, Carrot.
The two turned toward the kitchen and began making for the pantry. Corey heard his daughter humming in the room beyond, her tone only seeming to have gotten sweeter over the near decade that had passed since these two were married. It seemed more like her mother's before Wishingwell became ill. As they passed through the kitchen, Corey heard Carrot clear his throat, his hooves coming to a slow stop across the wooden floors. Actually, said Carrot, once more meeting Corey's gaze, there's one thing, something that I wondered you considered doing for me. Corey left Sugar Cube Corner smiling, the big eclair dangling from his mouth in its little bag. There was good news for Clyde. Upon reaching the hospitable loan and trust, Corey deposited the eclair in front of Paperclip and informed her to cancel the rest of his appointments for the morning. Turning once more back out into the street, the big old stallion felt himself becoming slightly winded, what with all the walking he was doing today. He laughed at himself as he turned back down a familiar road, one that led him to his own doorway. Upon entering, he went on quiet hose to the living room. There, Wishingwell sat in front of the fireplace, the space within absent flames as the warmth of spring washed over the house. He approached her quietly, thought of how lonely she looked without her grandchildren. As he did, he realized that Carrot's request certainly had merits. With that, he nuzzled her gently.
Darling,
he whispered as he touched his nose to her shoulder, leaving a small kiss on her cheek. Oh, Corey, came Wishingwell's voice as he awakened from her nap. Is it that late? No. I hardly even know. You came home so early.
Yeah, that's true, darling. That's true,
he said as he sat in front of her.
Just had a talk with Clyde, and then with the kids. Cupcake and Carrot, that is.
He grumbled a bit, tried to shake some of the growing stiffness out of his legs.
Feels like I've been walking all damn day.
He laughed as he turned his back to her. She knew intrinsically what he was asking for in the way that all married couples do. As he kneaded her hose across his back, he told her about Clyde's dilemma, about how Cupcake and Carrot had agreed to take in Clyde's energetic daughter as an apprentice. He told her about Carrot's request, gathering her hose around his shoulders and leaning back to her as he did. After they had discussed it for a good long while, they agreed. With that, Quarry stood, and together they went off through the streets of Ponyville. As Quarry pushed his wife through the small city, the wheels sounded out happily over the stallion's complaints about all the walking he was being asked to do that day. Before they had arrived at the small house, and the strain of that tiny word once more fell over him. Wishing Well watched Quarry pace back and forth. He knew that conversations of the type they were about to have didn't come easy to him. "It's all right, love," she said while she reached up to touch her nose to his. "The worst you could say is no. Then nothing was heads."
"I feel bad for Carrot, though,"
he said as he knocked upon the door.
"It's a right proper stallion who puts his mother first."
With that, a surprise cheesecake opened the door to her small home and welcomed them inside. Quarry did his best to sit politely as the mayors talked. They had just seen each other the weekend before. He wondered where they got so much to talk about in such a short period of time. He looked down at the tray before him. Upon it stood just a few crackers and slices of cheese. He got the distinct impression that it was all the food that was within the house. He looked at the mayors and wondered how they were aging so gracefully. What with Wishing Well being sick and Cheesecake not eating very well. He lifted his mug, took a long sip, and then cleared his throat. The mayors looked at him.
"I don't mean to interrupt,"
he said as he inattentionally interrupted.
"but we ain't here on a social call, Cheesecake."
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been going on," floated Cheesecake's voice, the ethereal tone hovering over the room. "Please, what can I do for you?" Quarry cleared his throat once more, and told her the story of his unusual day, accentuating how much walking he had been doing, and told her that her son had made a request. "And, what did Carrot ask you about?" she said as she looked to each in turn. Quarry rubbed his hoof through his mane, looked over her through the bridge of his nose.
"Well, Cheesecake, your boy's powerful word for you. Living here all alone. None of us are getting younger after all,"
he began. "He's always looked out for his mother," she said, smiling back to him. "He's always been so good to me, but what does that have to do with the two of you?"
"Well, seeing as Wishing Well and yourself get along so well, and I hate having her alone most of the day now. What with the grandkids off at academy and Ruby out of the house most of the day, well,
Quarry cleared his throat.
"Well, Cheesecake, we were wondering if you'd do us a favor and consider coming to live with us in that big old house of yours."
Cheesecake opened her mouth, but no words came. She felt Wishing Well's hose wrap up in hers. She looked down into the face of her dear friend. "Do consider it, Cheesy. I would just love to have you about, and we would be most accommodating," Wishing Well said as she patted Cheesecake on the hoof. "It would be so wonderful to have you with us." Cheesecake smiled and laid her head to that of Wishing Well. An hour later, Quarry was grumbling his way through the streets of Sugar Cube Corner to tell Cupcake and Carrot the good news. His shoulders went stiff as he did. He returned to his office and leaned against a chair for a grand total of 5 minutes before his aches and pains got to him. He told Paperclip to cancel his afternoon appointments, and with that went out into the spring air. Upon his porch was a proper sofa. As Wishing Well dozed nearby in her wheelchair, he put a soft kiss upon her forehead, and lay out upon the welcome expanse. As the warm spring breezes tousled his gray mane, he complained to No Pony about how all of the walking was beating him up. With that, he left his aches and pains behind as he fell into a well-deserved nap. A little voice drifted upon the breeze. "Thank you. You have no how important how that was." It spoke as it drifted on the breeze. "You cannot know how much that mattered. Thank you, my child. Rest well." Not a week later, Carrot stood at the top of his stairs doing some light cleaning, wanting to have Sugar Cube Corner ready for the appearance of his new resident. Behind him and down the hall, Cupcake finished laying linens in the bathroom, the one now especially set aside for their apprentice. Many thoughts went through the two, and the few small memories Cupcake had of a pink filly did little to calm Carrot's concerns and answer his questions. As he finished sweeping the upstairs hallway, the bell above the door rang, and he placed the broom inside, knowing that at this hour it would only be their new arrival. He turned and faced down the stairwell. To his amazement, the sound of excitement seemed to erupt from downstairs. The sudden presence of a new energy was wrapped in it, one that seemed to fly up the stairs and buffet him in winds. And with that, began the third round of the game of this. He trotted down the stairs, straightening himself up as he went. Arriving at the bottom of the stairs, he expected to find some young mare cautiously standing there, perhaps even a little teary-eyed at being away from home. And pause for laughter. His perceptions were blown away as he witnessed a small stack of suitcases lying jammed in and around the door. Inside his showcase room, a form of energy seemed to have been unleashed. Perhaps some kind of magic spell or natural phenomenon like ball lightning seemed to be bounding about. It was only after a moment of contemplation that he realized it was a pink mare, one who seemed to be going from stand and stack and back while all the while naming his treats in quick succession. "And quick buzz, and all the times, and macaroons, and..." He watched as she seemed to bounce around, seemed to be trying to expand an energy that was cascading through her. He looked in amazement as she continued to spring from one decorated confectionery to the next. "It's a pound cake, and black forest cake, and this is a carrot cake!" Carrot turned his head to see her looking right at him with an excessive smile. Hello, yes, I am Carrot Egg, and I take it that..." he began. She had one of his hooves in hers before he had even completed that sentence. She stood there, dancing on her rear hooves as she began to try to spin him around, and tried to sing as she did. "Oh, it's a land of cheesy cakes, and I found that nothing to beat." She suddenly stopped and looking more than a little defeated. Her expression changed so quickly and startled him. "Oh, and I was so sure I had it that time," she said with exasperation. She turned to him again, regaining herself as she once more became happy and vibrant, and another smile went across her face. "Oh, is that our Piggy Pie?" came Cupcake's voice from the bottom of the stairwell, her tone lifting as she set eyes upon a young mare who looked so much like a little pink filly who had come frequently with her family to her big house. To her, it was so as she was looking over a beloved little figure that she babysat, one that had exploded into the form of a young mare. Carrot looked on as Pinky left for Cupcake, seemed to try to nuzzle her and hug her at the same time. "Miss Pinky! Miss Pinky!" called Pinky as she wrapped Cupcake tighter. Carrot could not help but smile as these two mares renewed their acquaintance, as he saw something flow through Cupcake that he enjoyed seeing on her face very much. "Actually, dearie, it's Mrs. Cupcake now. Have you met my husband, Mr. Carrot Cake?" asked Cupcake, releasing her hold on Pinky. We went dancing, but I can't remember the song," Pinky exclaimed as he bounced around again. Cupcake looked at Carrot quizzically. He simply shrugged his shoulders. Before he could even lower his expression, this pink mare had bounded up to him one more time, and now wrapped him in a hug as well. Carrot blushed and tried to think of something to say. Before he could even do so, she was off again, bounding across the room to introduce herself to the pastries. Cupcake and Carrot watched her for a moment, different emotions waltzing through them. As she went along, their eyes followed her as she seemed to be unraveling at a whole new world, one that was full of excitement and new discoveries, as especially sort of calm as a periods.
And I can learn how to bake pastries and cookies and pies, and they're really good because I'm baking pie, you got carrot cake and cookies, and
Carrot's eyebrow arched as Pinky seemed to stop in midair and turn to Cupcake.
Hey! You should change your name to Cupcake instead of Cupcake. 2 words, and that way you could be Mr. and Mrs. Cakes. And then you would be the cakes, and then you could make cakes, and I'll make cakes too, and then that would be really neat, except my name is Pie. Become me a Diane Pie, actually, named after my green pie who...
As he continued, Carrot turned to his wife and smiled once more. Carrot expecting her to share his growing sense of the absurdity. Instead, she seemed to be lost in thought. Honey bun? He called to her, lifting his hoof.
No thanks!
Answered Pinkie Pie.
I'll eat later. I think I should get my things inside right now.
Cupcake seemed to shake off her distraction, and watched as Pinkie Pie gathered up a few of her belongings. As she threw her smile between them, as though wondering which would be the first to offer the next bit of excitement.
Come along, dearie,
she said as he grasped Pinkie's hoof.
Let me show you to your rooms, and then we'll take the 10-bit tour, righty? Okie dokie, but I'll have to pay you back up to 10 bits later.
Pinkie answered as she followed Cupcake up the stairs. Cupcake now offered to smile, as he looked back down to where Carrot shrugged his shoulders. He looked at a few more suitcases and opened the door to see what she had left outside. As he did, something large, cylindrical, and very unhappy looking stared back at him. He fumbled for the word, fought to bring it to the fore, and when he did, his statement sounded out into the street in a politely restrained panic. Is that a cannon? After stowing the artillery piece in the downstairs den, he joined them as the tour moved from Pinkie's few new rooms and into the bakery as a whole. As they watched, she seemed to launch into a convulsion. Shades of panic seemed to wash over Carrot and Cupcake. As soon as they moved to help her, she stopped and looked back at them with yet another smile.
Uh-oh, decent. What's up with something falling? Oh, and the door opening too,
she said with a smile. Carrot and Cupcake tossed a look between them, not understanding what was going on. Make you sense?
A door, dearie.
With that, the folding door to the attic came open, rushing down over them with a clang and dumping a cloud of dust all across the couple as they stood there in it, looking more like ghosts than ponies.
Yep,
said Pinkie, walking between the 2 distant rooms, appearing to enter one room and come out of another one entirely. Pinkie looked at Sue standing there, saw that the door had fallen. Carrot had pulled his wife into him and sheltered her. Pinkie smiled up at them as he lifted his foreleg from across her face, revealing the rosy eyes where something of a fond resemblance seemed to grow.
What's up here?
Ow, Carrot said as his wife gently brushed the dust from his face. That's the egg.
No, let's have a look.
Carrot had gently pulled himself up into the attic, bravely going first into a space not often used by him or his wife. He tripped a few times, the rickety old steps and the broken spring that he caused to collapse biting at him as he climbed. A few items hovered around the entrance to the space. The heart-warming tree ornaments and magical lights, fans for the summer, a box of books containing baby names. He looked down upon the last one, different thoughts going through him as he waited for what other mare would come up to the lofty space behind him.
What you doing, Mr. Carrot Cake?
Came a voice from out of nowhere. The voice came from behind him, from out of the darkness of the attic beyond. The His singular effect was to cause him to yelp and jump in alarm, fall back down the attic stairs. Pinkie Pie looked down to him through the trap door to see a stunned carrot cake walking along in wobbly patterns as Cupcake brushed aside him, trying to steady him as his tongue stuck out of the side of his head and metaphorical birds flew around him. "Pinkie!" Cupcake called up in surprise. "How did you get up there? You didn't go up the ladder." "I used the stairs at the end of the hall, sorry about all the old boxes and stuff, but that ladder doesn't look too safe to me. Like, it looks like it could fall down any second," she said, stating the obvious. Almost in tune with her observation, the second spring broke, earning Carrot's ire. Carrot once again began to climb as Cupcake went off to research Pinkie's finding. Carrot, now bruised and dirty, watched Pinkie as he jumped, swirled, and cavorted around the open space. He saw how happily she seemed to swim through the expanse of the attic. It was as though she longed for a release, a freedom he could not name. If you people have been playing Smile ever since Pinkie had arrived, that's okay, that's perfectly normal. He had never really thought about the space much. He had never seen it much more than a large, drafty room that stayed too far hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. As he stood by the old fireplace, stuffed tight with newspapers and bits of insulation, he could only marvel at the freedom she seemed to be experienced by just being there, just being able to expend some of that marvelous energy. "Careful for the door, Mr. Carrot!" Pinkie said. Her voice reached for him, and he watched Pinkie gave another shake. As sweat poured from his brow, he looked to the distant trap door of the attic stairway, locked it in his gaze. Unfortunately, it was the door beside the fireplace that came open, Cupcake unintentionally walloping him as she discovered the truth behind Pinkie's earlier discovery. "Why, Carrot, it is true," she said as she thought through the door, not realizing the mass that she heaved and shoved against in frustration was the prostrate form of her husband. "We have been here all of these years, and we never knew that the old closet was a stairwell. Why, we can replace the boards and get rid of that nasty trapdoor, and we can—" She looked for him. She turned around at once to see her husband on the floor, with his tongue sticking out of his head, looking as though he had been having a hard afternoon indeed. As Carrot recovered with his throbbing head resting in the lap of his wife, the two listened and watched as Pinkie continued to dance about the space. As Pinkie pulled some insulation away from one of the windows, she began to voice her thoughts. "And we can have dances out here, and we can throw parties, and we can host buffets, and we can rent it out, and we can—" Pinkie began to try to sing again, to give her voice happiness. As she did, she once again stuttered to a stop, and her pose seemed to skip beneath her. She deflated once more, the failure of her song and dance catching her and making her own magic seem to fade. She turned and looked at Carrot and Cupcake, as though wondering if they had been seeing how badly she had failed in her attempt. Instead, Pinkie smiled. The two sat there once more covered in dust and cobwebs that fell from the windows, and beams above where the insulation had been pulled free of the panes and shutters. "Wowie zowie, you two sure like to get messy," she said while spinning once more, looking high overhead. "Oh, is that a Kabbalah?" A short while later, a very dirty and dingy Cupcake and Carrot sat in the downstairs living room, the one located off to the kitchen and the den that doubled as the bakery office. Together, they shared one of the most basic beverages that they had had, and looked to one another with subtle looks of concern, surprise, and hilarity. At once, Cupcake's ears perked up, and Carrot followed her eyes as they looked to the ceiling. Overhead, the sound of hooves sounded out, and the dull thud of a pony landing on a bed reached him as the spring evening dove into the night. A short while later, as some of the beverage definitely was seen to disappear from the decanter, a new sound had filled their home and place of business. The sound of a sleeping pony drifted over a house. A pony that had very suddenly become part of their lives.
One that snored rather loudly.
The glasses chimed as they touched them to one another. As a soiled cupcake tucked herself into a grimy carrot cake, they thought about how she had already made them ponder so many things. Yes, they could use the attic to host parties. Why hadn't they thought of that? The chance to open up their lives to somebody new. It was both exciting and at once terrifying. They were now both covered in dust and cobwebs. Carrot was even slightly bruised. There was a price to pay, this they realized. They had not simply been provided free labor. There were real issues here, ones that would have to be resolved. A cannon sat a room away after all, and they both wondered how she would react to some basic ground rules. Even as they discussed what those rules would mean, they could somehow sense that this was another part of the journey of their lives, that they were somehow dealt another hand in the game of this. No matter, it would all work out. In the end, there was a new pony in their lives. For all that it would involve, they both knew that they wanted to feel what that was like. A chance to help some pony find her mark, to grow. Over the head, the sound of a snoring Pinkie Pie fell over them. As they looked to one another, dust toppled from them. A carrot pulled a fine filament of cobweb from the hair of his wife. Dingamina, Diane, Pie had, they realized, been in their lives for a total of 3 hours. And you wanted kids, she said, Cupcake said in a chiding tone, smirking at him. He laughed and gathered her closer. As he did so, her smirk disappeared into a warm smile, as their noses rubbed together for a great long while. With that, they sat in their parlor and finished their drinks, wrapped close to one another as the sound of spring insects drifted through the open windows.
Prepare yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Next chapter, the crying will commence!